afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. It has been a very busy summer here for everyone, but we have another chat lined up. My guest tonight is a returning one. He just finished up the puzzle language game, so to speak, and we're going to be chatting about that, lessons learned, and what it's like to finish the game. So, please welcome back to the podcast, Erik Andersen. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's fun to talk to you again.
It is great to have you back on, and it's been a very busy summer for me. I'm sure it's been very busy for you in the last few months.
Yeah, it has. Especially right up until release, and then fixing things afterwards, of course.
hmm So, for people who missed our last chat, could you talk a little bit about like who you are and what is the elevator pitch for, so to speak?
Yeah, so my name is Erik. I am a indie game developer. I made this game, so to speak. Basically, I am interested in language teaching in general. I've studied Japanese for a long time, and that's been a hard process. I have never spent so much time investing in learning something that I'm still so bad at, and so I wanted to create sort of a different experience for people to be able to learn Japanese that's a little bit different from memorizing things from a textbook or playing. There's some RPG kind of games. There's a couple other like games for learning Japanese and some tools, but I wanted to make something that was more like a puzzle, where it's kind of like you're traveling, you're walking around, you're looking at signs, and you're trying to figure out what they mean, and you hear people talking, and you want to figure out what they're saying. So it does not tell you what words mean right away. You have to figure it out for yourself.
All right. We're still in like that slight delay. I'm wondering if there is something like weird going on with Discord or not, but I think
Okay.
it should be fine for this. But yeah, so just to refresh my memory, how long were you developing, so to speak, for?
Oh, it took almost 6 years by the end of it.
All right.
Yeah, it's a long time. So we talked, I think, 3 years ago, which was kind of halfway through the development, and then I ended up spending 3 more years polishing it and adding content. It kind of grew quite a bit beyond what it was when we talked.
hmm Let me see if I can find our last chat. That was 2022. Yeah, so about
Yeah,
3 years. So I guess like to start like catching up, what has like as we were talking back in 2022 to where we're at in 2025, like what has been like added or what did you like change between when we last spoke to where the game is now?
yeah. So I decided that it was really important to me that the game cover enough words that somebody could realistically have a chance of sitting down and playing the game. And then if they went to Japan, they would actually recognize something. I didn't want it to be really short
hmm
and then have people sort of unsatisfied because they may have enjoyed the game, but then they didn't feel like it was actually useful in the real world. And so I decided that I needed something around maybe 500 or 600 words for that to be realistic. Like you could actually have a good probability of understanding several basic situations. And so a lot of it was expanding just the size of the game so that it would cover that many words. It ended up with about 650 words in the final game, which is equivalent about 1 year of a college class, I guess. You know, plus or minus there. But so it ended up with maybe 150 levels, and each level has it ranges, but somewhere between 3 or 4, all the way up to 30 different signs you have to figure out. So it would take somebody who didn't know Japanese at all maybe 12 hours, I would estimate, to complete the game. Um, and that's much longer than it was 3 years ago. And I also kind of trimmed the game design some too. So like it had some mechanics earlier on that I decided were kind of distracting, and I really reduced it so it was just focusing on the puzzle elements of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's I think like a really interesting point to ask you about. Like when we look at like a lot of the like edutainment or trying to learn through games like style of design, there's that push and pull between how much of a game there should be versus how much should there actually be of like the learning side. Because you'll have
Yeah.
people who look at it from both ways. You'll have someone who will say, "Well, I want more of a game, to kind of like bring someone in, like the teaching's a second." But then, as you were saying, like if someone's interested in picking this up legitimately to try and learn Japanese, the game
Mhm.
mechanics or the gameplay itself may get in the way of that or kind of distract from it.
Yeah, I agree. And that was a challenge that I spent time thinking about. And it's still, I think, pretty heavy on the learning side. I have a counterpoint now, which is there's this game Chance of Sonar, which I don't know if you heard of or you played, but
Hmm.
there was it's not an educational game, but it's a language puzzle
Yeah.
game that came out late 2023, I think. And it's wonderful. It got a lot of attention. And uh, I think it's only marginally educational in the sense that I mean they made up the languages that are in the game, so they don't actually care necessarily if you retain them. But I played it all the way through. I loved it, and then I waited about 6 months, and then I played it through again, and I was surprised how little I remembered. Um, and so, however, they sort of spent their time made it very fun, but not necessarily so um, uh, heavy on the reinforcement and the learning side of it. Whereas my game is much more uh, on it's sort of geared to help people understand and remember as much as possible. I still don't completely know if it's the most effective it could be even at that, but that's sort of the direction in this trade-off that you're talking about that I went.
Hmm. Yeah, I did play a Chance, and I was horrible at it. Like I find like any kind of like linguistic challenge or kind of like a deciphering like a language, I am absolutely horrible with. For anyone watching this live record it, I suffer when it came to Tunic and trying to solve like some of the meta puzzles in that one.
I'm sorry to hear that you are suffering through it, but yeah, it is challenging.
And with like with Chance and that kind of particular style, like we have
Mhm.
seen games like kind of like I guess like teach implicitly. Like you're not like obviously you're not going to be taking what you learn from Chance or from Tunic's like deciphering and then be able to learn new language. But like taking those like critical thinking skills and what you kind of learn in the process can certainly be applied to like other games or even just like other like thought processes.
Yeah, I agree, and I think those games have shown that this is kind of an emerging space. Like, I don't
Hmm.
think there's really that many games that have explored this. You kind of see some here and there, but it's definitely growing.
Yeah. I mean, like, if we talk about like the 90s, there was kind of like that rise of edutainment. For anyone who
Mhm.
remembers the likes of Broderbund, the Learning
Yeah.
Company, and like they were trying to pitch things very much for like a school setting. So all the games were kind of filtered around something you would play in like an elementary school or high school.
Mhm.
And while they were a lot of fun, again, I could really date myself how many of those I played back then. It's kind of and like this is always a challenge. I'm curious what you think about this point about how do we like I guess like test or how do we like can determine if people are retaining this information because this is something that when I speak to a lot of like teachers or even like developers like Zach
Mhm.
Barth when he was like trying to get
Mhm, mhm,
his
mhm.
whole library into
Mhm.
schools that it's hard to tell someone if they play this game they'll be able to learn this and this but
Yeah.
how do you like accurately like I guess like teach someone or how do you actually test that seems to be like the
Mhm.
challenge when it comes to like the educational benefit of these titles.
Yeah, so before I started doing game development, of so to speak, I actually used to teach at university. I used to teach
Hmm.
computer science, and so I have a little bit of idea of how you actually measure it. I mean, basically, the academic way is you give somebody a test before they play the game, and then you give them a test after they play the game, and you try to see did they get better at it
Hmm.
whatever is on the test from playing the game. And this is something that some educate more deeply into the educational focus games. They might try to do some of this. I haven't done anything like this, so to speak. Like I despite coming from that world of sort of rigorous academic studies, I actually kind of wanted to get away from that a little bit and focus more on mass appeal than strictly focus on schools as sort of a main target. Um, but to answer your question, like that is how you would do it, and that there are projects where that was a major focus of the design, is like really truly measuring, are people learning.
Hmm. And with like to go back to what you were saying like a minute ago about kind of like trimming like the gameplay in favor of like more
Mhm.
to focus on the words, could you give like an example of that, like for people who may be listening?
Yeah, so and it's interesting. I'm not 100% sure whether or not this was the right decision, but
Hmm.
there used to be a mechanic in the game that was not just comprehension, it was also involving production of speech. I mean, not that you're saying things literally, but I have to explain a little bit of the game, that you drag and drop words around within the
Hmm.
game to match Japanese words to English words. So there was another kind of challenge where there were signs that had fill in the blanks, basically, that it was asking you to use the words that you have learned and fill in missing words. And I just had a hard time getting that part of it up to a level of quality that I thought was on par with the comprehension part of it, matching signs where everything is written on the sign. It's as it would look like in Japan. Um, and so I cut it. And I think that it did make the game have more consistent quality because the challenges that I'd come up with that use that other mechanic were not as good. However, on Steam, one of the negative reviews of the game is saying, "Oh, I actually wish that this game asked you to use Japanese, like make sentences of Japanese, not just comprehend separate sentences." Uh,
Hmm.
and so it's possible that maybe I cut something out that players would have liked, but I just had a hard time making sure that the quality was consistent, and that's what motivated that decision. But that's an example of what I mean, of sort of minimalizing it to try to focus the energy on what I thought was the most effective.
Hmm. Yep, and that I think is a very interesting point. That's with like trying to like again like balance the kind of like gameplay or kind of the practicality versus just the learning. That you could have ran into that situation where you're kind of like pulling the gameplay in two different directions. Someone trying to learn things for the
Mhm.
first time, and someone trying to actually like talk and explain things as well. And it's definitely like it'll almost feel like you could have like two separate games or two separate systems
Right.
in that respect. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I think one of the challenges, I think we made some about this in our last chat, was about getting the game done. Because
Yeah.
as you were
Exactly.
saying up earlier about limiting like how many words you want to use, like you could have obviously
Yeah.
fit the entire Japanese language into the game, but
Mhm.
how long would that take to make a game like
Right.
at that scale?
Exactly. Yeah. And even I can't believe how long it took
Hmm.
even to just get the 1 year of a college class level of vocabulary, like that count, like to have it in the game. And I don't even think each word is really in the game enough, to be totally honest. Like I think even more reinforcement is necessary than the game truly has, that the game has already. But even just getting it to like a minimal level of having that number of words with a little bit of reinforcement in there took me so many years. And so, yeah, I'm glad I didn't try to shoot for a higher target, because then I never would finish this like that. It's just so hard to finish games. I'm sure when you talk to other developers, you hear this. It's like like I know it's not unique to me, but just my perception of how much effort it was going to involve is just so much lower than how it actually took.
Hmm. Yeah, and like whenever I speak with developers, like when we do like these follow up casts about like finishing their game, one question I always like to ask is like, how did you like know you were at the finish line? Like, how much did you know you wanted to put in this game to finally say enough is enough? Let's end it.
Yeah. For me, my wife was kind of nudging me like, you got to finish this. And so that became kind of an external constraint that was pushing me to finish. And so I felt at the time of releasing it like, oh, I really, really think that this needs to be better. I'm unhappy about this. But actually, the reviews of the game have been much more positive than I expected. As we're speaking, it's like 97% positive on Steam, and there are a couple of negative reviews, but I agree with many of the points that those reviews bring up, but actually, there's been much more positivity than I expected. So my perception was like, oh, no one's gonna like this. Like these flaws that I see in the game, this is just too much. But that wasn't realistic. So like, it's been a good experience actually releasing it and seeing what the feedback is to realize that like, oh, maybe I didn't need to be quite as harsh on the my own evaluation of how good the game was.
Mhm. You know, I think that's like one of the things that we've kind of like seen like as indie dev as a whole in like the last like 4 to 5 years has been focusing more on like smaller projects. Like instead of trying to put everything you want into the game, focus on one really good or one major core experience. Because it's ultimately, I think, better to be able to release multiple games that are smaller versus trying to work on that one big like mega game. And as you said, like you started working on this, you said 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, I was just like having this conversation with another developer last week, and we were talking about like how much like indie dev has like really changed in like the past 5 years.
Mhm.
That like when I speak to a lot of like newer developers today, they're like, I don't want to work on this thing for more than like a year or two. Like, I won't get this game done out. I don't care. Just get it like out of my plate. Like at that point.
Yeah. hmm I think that this is a tough question. I hear people debating about this also, and
Mm-hmm.
I did just sort of explain that it may have been the case that I could have released it sooner than I did and still had positivity around the release. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's also important though to that a game kind of needs to sufficiently explore the space of whatever its mission is to thoroughly evaluate that idea is sort of the sense I get. So I think there's games that
Mm-hmm.
can have a smaller scope. A short hike is a really great example of this.
Yeah.
That like it's just like it's short, but it's great, right? Like it kind of the game mechanics sort of create this scope almost that game's length it feels like perfectly within. Um, and for language games, especially if the game is focusing on a real language, then I
Mm-hmm.
think there's some other considerations. Like, this is a long-winded way of saying I don't necessarily regret the amount of time I spent on it. Like, I think I could have released it a little bit sooner, but I'm also really glad that it has the depth that it has. There are actually there's some positive reviews that are saying like, oh, this game is kind of short. Actually, in my mind, it's not short. It's actually like there's a lot of content in there. People also have certain expectations about what kind of value are they going to get from what they spend on it, and if the game structure kind of makes it seem like it should have a large amount of content, I think it can in some circumstances be important for it to have that content if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I have a dungeon crawler game, there's this question if I add the seventh dungeon, what does that really add to the game? But for a language game, actually, the words that I'm adding, each new set of words, it's giving you a whole new capability that you didn't have without it, like a new topic or a new environment that you can go and you can be conversational in. So I felt like actually it was easier in my mind to justify the length or adding additional content to something like this, where just there's so many words to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about adding more depth and breadth to a game like this. Like to your dungeon crawler example, when we talk to a lot of developers in that respect, more is uniformly going to be better. that, okay, a new dungeon means more level, means more stages, more things to do in it. When we talk about traditional puzzle games, one of the things that we find is that more is not necessarily better in that respect. That, okay, if you have 10,000 sliding box puzzles, that sounds great, but how many people are going to be so into, Sokobon that they're going to do 10,000 versions of that? But as like the point as you were making, with a game that's meant to like teach or educate someone, it's a very different pool because, as we said, every new word you add in is something that someone can hopefully learn and pick up going forward. So it creates, I think, a very interesting dynamic. It kind of, I think, gets away from what we talk about, like traditional puzzle marketing and puzzle design.
Yeah, I agree, and that actually I think is kind of one of the fun things about working on this space, that it's not just entertainment, but the learning goals kind of add some additional constraints.
Mm-hmm. And I think this was a question that I asked you about last time, but I kind of want to bring it up here. In terms of difficulty for a game like this, like anytime we talk about kind of like more like critical thinking or kind of more like not so much like I guess like knowledge-based puzzle design, it becomes a lot harder to balance because, as we've said, like people learn very differently. Someone like myself trying to do a game like Chance to Car, I'm gonna have a lot more trouble than it. But if you give me like a more like a movement-based puzzle or like an environmental puzzle, like pick any action adventure game, those click in my head immediately. And the opposite can be true for everyone else. So with designing like the structure, so to speak, what was kind of like how did things go like playtesting wise, or like did you tweak things in order to make them like easier, harder, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, almost everything when I first made it and the first draft of any level, it was typically way too hard. It was always way easier in my mind than it would be for players, even the most motivated people. And this is a pattern I've seen elsewhere too. I mentioned before I used to be a professor, and I had game design students in my classes that were making games of all different genres, and they also ran into the same thing all the time. That it tended to be that when they made things, it was much too hard at first, and then usually there's this process of trying to make it more straightforward, reduce the complexity over time. So I definitely went through that, and I spent a lot of time trying to make things more straightforward. And so I have had a whole bunch of playtesters play it, and when I released it, I would say that there was a split. Like some people were really, really, really enjoying it and thought that the difficulty was good, and there were some people that thought the difficulty was too hard. I had a surprise upon releasing, and I wonder what you think about this, because it's a little bit interesting. I discovered actually, even though I aimed the game at absolute beginners in Japanese, because I thought that's where the biggest market would be. My idea of who would buy the game was somebody who hadn't really learned before, but was sort of vaguely interested in starting it and thought maybe this would be a great way to pick it up. The background of the players who actually bought it is much more than I expected. So it seems to me from the comments I'm getting in the reviews that most of the customers actually have quite a bit of background. And I think what's happening is people who want to learn Japanese, it's likely that they've taken steps to do it. They are either doing it on their own or they took classes before and then are struggling to kind of maintain that over time. But it's actually, there's not that many customers who truly are buying it knowing nothing. And so, interestingly, even though I think the game was scaled too difficult, it ended up being maybe okay, because I also didn't quite understand who my customer base was going to be. And the customer base actually ended up having more background than I expected. So I feel like it's actually rather well paced for those people that I just described to have a little bit of background already. And this wasn't intentional. I think I just got lucky.
And I think a lot of that could also be like how someone is going to be finding a game like this. Like if someone's not interested in learning language at all, they're obviously not going to be searching, how to learn
Yeah.
Japanese, or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
best programs to learn a new language.
Hmm.
And that could be also be where you're getting people from it. But I think also it could also have the benefit, as you said, if you're tweaking this to be for someone who has never learned a language before, that also means
Hmm.
making sure that the UI and the GUI are going to be very easy to learn, very easy to parse. So that
Hmm.
in response, like if let's say someone who has tried learning Japanese was never touched a video game or has never touched a game like this, would make it easier for them to kind of pick that up. And it's a very interesting point. Again, like it's that struggle when we talk about kind of figuring out who your market is. And I've been
Yeah.
doing some like consulting work since
Hmm.
our last chat, and it's always that kind of problem, or is that always that very important riddle of if I'm aiming my game to be for a casual audience, what does that mean for my gameplay? If it's going to be like for hardcore, how do I get that approach? How do I get that to people? And with like puzzle design in of itself, or any kind of puzzle game, you always have that challenge of is someone playing this because they're interested in learning it, or they're interested
Hmm.
in just kind of like the vibe or the feeling. And it's a very tough answer because again, like you never really know unless you take a hardcore marketing examination, or you start polling people as to what they're looking for. I
Yeah,
guess
I
like,
agree.
oh, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, no, I completely agree, and this experience has humbled me a little bit in realizing that like I didn't know who my customers were going to be, and I suspect a lot of people have this issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's something that I hear a lot from indie developers. Because again, like a lot of indie developers obviously do not have a marketing background. Again, you're not
Hmm.
going to game development to be a marketer. You're getting into game development to make games. I
Yeah.
guess like as like an interesting, I guess like a thought experiment for you then. Like knowing like now in terms of like who the market was going to kind of like shift towards with so to speak, would there be like any changes to the gameplay or any changes to like I guess like the presentation that you would think about like implementing?
I think that so it's an interesting question of would I do things differently up until this point? I'm not
Mhm.
sure. I think it might be I'm okay with how it was, but as far as what I would do next, what I've really realized is that there's a much bigger market for upper level people than I thought.
Mm.
I thought that there's kind of like a pyramid basically of like all the beginners are there's tons of beginners and not so many people stick with learning Japanese or any language really. So what I've realized is that everyone makes the same decision that they target the beginners. And actually there's a whole bunch of people that are above that are kind of in this bad space where they're maybe beyond Duolingo,
Mm-hmm.
but they still don't know enough to be able to understand a native speaker material, like something that's not targeted towards learners at all, like a movie or a comic book or music or something like that. Whatever people are interested in uh, gaining the ability to be able to learn. So there's this gap in between. So that I think there's much bigger opportunity there than I and many other people realized. Because there's basically no products targeting, definitely no games. There might be some other tools, but there's really nothing on the market at all that's like targeting that gap. But the intermediate level people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, like it's one of the challenges we talk about with marketing about knowing who your audience is. Designing something for, you know, zero bottom of the star, bottom of the barrel kind of consumer is obviously different than targeting someone who's had a background or someone who's, an expert who has, completely
Mhm.
mastered language, just looking for like a few more words, a little bit more to go with it. And I think like to go back to what we talked about like kind of like the rise of edutainment software, educational software in the 90s and early 2000s. We saw like having like these like different like tiers. So, this is the the basic algebra, and then we go to advanced, and then
Mhm.
we have geometry and statistics and all that. And it was kind of like trying to position the game around that. And as you were saying
Mhm.
a few minutes ago, like the trap a lot of those can fall into is just trying to say, I'm going to make the game for everyone. This is going to be for
Yeah.
someone who has zero experience to someone who's a master and everything in
Mhm.
between. And then you
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
end up in this situation. I think to go, as you said, going back to your background as a teacher, that if you try to teach like everything at once, it's going to either A, overwhelm someone, or B, the
Yeah.
people who are already experts, like, I don't care about all this. I already know all this. I want to focus on this specific track.
Yep. And this is a challenge that I'm thinking about now. Like now, as I'm trying to think about like what am I going to do in the future?
Mm-hmm.
What you're just speaking of is something that is I'm thinking a lot about, of how do you give the player more agency? Like how, if you are going to have people of all different skill levels play it, like how do you either communicate up front who this game is for and who should buy it, or within the game allow people to kind of explore more and figure out what they're doing. I don't know if you used Duolingo before, but my game is very similar to that in the sense that it's kind of this one really long linear progression.
Mm-hmm.
And so the advantage of a linear progression is then you can do the scaling
Yeah.
of like, I know everyone who is here has had this in the past, but the problem is then you may not like wherever it puts you in this endless sequence of tasks. And so I think one of the major challenges is for myself, for the game designers, is within language learning specifically, is allowing people to find whatever is at their level. Because there are going to be people who are at many different levels who are going to buy the product, regardless of how good you are with your communication up front.
Mm.
And I think people like being able to choose too.
Yeah. And again, that also gets at like the challenge of like scale and like what you're able to do as a developer. Because implementing like a full like dynamic way of playing this game that it reads how good you are and gives you lessons accordingly, that would be great. But as a developer, are you able to make something of that scale and scope? Because if you're not able to, then you end with a product that just feels like it's not. It's kind of like rudderless, like it doesn't know where it's going to go or who it's going to be aimed at. And
Yeah,
then, what do you do then?
yeah, it's hard. I just prototype and try. Yeah, like I mean, some amount of the game design just is accepting the risk of failure anyway. That's not a great answer what you're saying, but like that's kind of my honest opinion. Is like, yeah, it's hard. It may not work. And design is often trying to figure out where do you have the most luck of, if I pursue this a little bit further, I'll have the most chance of success, even though I can't guarantee it.
Mm-hmm. So another question I wanted to ask you about, kind of, I guess, like again, like the challenge of balancing the game with the learning. When we talk
Mhm.
about a lot of puzzle games, especially like more recent ones, there's been this kind of push to, I guess, provide a better like wrapper towards the puzzle solving. If you look at stuff like Isles of Sea and Sky, what's it, a
Mhm.
Lab Rat, I'm forgetting like a half a dozen other ones, that it's no longer just about here's 50 single screens of puzzles, just do them one
Mhm.
after another. It's now kind of like more about either like framing around story, kind of like framing around, you're getting like rewards, or there's, little trinkets you can earn for like beating stages or doing things well. With something like with So to Speak, like, I guess like in terms of like that level in presentation, what has been like kind of like your thoughts or like the process of like how that could fit into a game like this?
Yeah, I didn't really explore that too
Mm-hmm.
much, and it's as we talked about before, the direction the game ended up going was kind of minimalist. Um, and I didn't really have much of like a meta level, higher
Mm-hmm.
level puzzle within a puzzle, or collectibles, or these things that you sometimes see puzzle games doing. But there is what I would say in my defense, basically, is that picking language as a topic, sort of the source of the difficulty and the interestingness of the puzzles,
Mm-hmm.
allows it to grow in a way that most puzzle games won't, which is specifically that the player's skill as they get better at solving these puzzles is mirroring their development of the language, in the sense that they're gaining entirely new skills with each stage that they're going through. So this contrasts, I think, with more traditional puzzle designs where it kind of is. It also, you spoke for a second about 50 puzzles in a sequence, right? Like it's really a challenge to make that 50th one truly different from the 49 that
Mm-hmm.
came before
Yeah.
it. But for language puzzle games, and I would include Chance of Sonar in this as well, it is different because when you add the 50th level, it's covering something that was not there before. And the new words that you introduce interact with all the existing words that were in the game and sometimes can create interesting situations. So uh, I think that's what I would say. It's like, no, I didn't really go for like collectibles or anything like that. I went for like I'm going to pick a source of inspiration for the puzzle design that gives me all of the depth I could ever need, without needing to add any additional things on top of it.
Mm-hmm. And like to that point about kind of like the linearity of like building puzzles like this, that's another very interesting challenge when we talk about puzzle design. That if someone like this is something that I spoke a lot about with Zach Barth, that if each puzzle is designed to kind of infer or teach you to solve the next puzzle, if someone gets a puzzle 3 and has no idea what they're doing, even if you give them the solution to it, that's not going to mean anything if they get stuck on puzzle 4 because they didn't learn the logic of the previous puzzle.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I guess like with a game like so to speak, it being about language and linguistics along those lines, it's another very like interesting hurdle. If someone is not grasping, why the solution to this puzzle is this, how like is there a way to kind of course correct, or is that person just kind of like lost to the experience?
So some course correction happens through the repetition. So, luckily, within a language learning game, people are sort of accepting of the idea that the same word is going to have to show up multiple times. Does that make sense? So, like,
Mm-hmm.
I can get away with some of this. I think where other puzzle designs, players might need more novelty constantly. But I can keep kind of revisiting the same words. So that's what I would say. Like, uh, the puzzle designs are almost always built around understanding the meaning of some new word, and if you don't quite get it from one example, it's going to come back up.
Mm-hmm.
And so people sometimes might kind of grasp it a little bit later through these repetitive puzzle designs where it's reusing the same words intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is a kind of again like another advantage of games like so to speak and chance that if these things just they don't disappear in the ether. Once you solve a puzzle, you're never going to see those words again. No, they're going to show up in another point. And I guess as another like challenge I want to ask you about in terms of length, we spoke about again like limiting what words you want to use and trying to wrap the game up. For a game like this, or if you've done like any research into like similar programs or similar titles, what's kind of like is there like an acceptable or agreed upon like solid length for a game like this? Like keep someone's interest out of them just like just getting completely burnt out.
Um, I don't think there is an acceptable length. Like, and that's actually, I think, something that many of the developers in this space struggle with, because of this problem of they set out to teach the whole language, but the whole language is never going to fit into
Mm-hmm.
what one developer or a few developers can do within a small amount of time. So you have to cut it somewhere, and deciding what is enough is a huge challenge. The other developers that have made language learning games have cut it, at all different points. Um, and it's sort of interesting to see. However, I do think that there is sort of a consistent, it's not completely consistent, but Steam customers do have certain expectations about how many hours am I going to be able to invest in
Mm-hmm.
this game based on the dollars I'm spending. And there's variations in different genres, but you see the same kinds of reviews come up if you look around all these games, right? Like that it's that people expect a certain amount of hours, I think. And so I have noticed that people come into, so to speak, with those same expectations. Maybe they're gonna kind of vary them a little bit because the game is different from other games, but people still have that same expectation of like, I pay this much, I want this amount of time of to be entertained.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think it's important to stay within those expectations.
Mm-hmm. And we've been seeing more games being priced higher in like the past 5 years. trying to add like more value in that respect to it, and it has been like a very stark difference compared to like 7 8 years ago when most games are maybe 5 4.99 9.99, maybe rarely 14.99, and it's very tough, as I'm sure you're well aware. I'm sure everyone else is well aware about getting or figuring out what is a good price for your game. Because people will say, "Well,
Yeah.
just price it cheap." Well, okay, how do you make some kind of
Yeah.
revenue off of that?
It's hard, and you get only one shot at
Yeah.
this too, which is also hard, right? So like I wish that I could clone myself and have released the game at many different prices and then just know what the revenue would have been and picked the best point. But you don't get that opportunity, so you just have to kind of guess. I mean I understand both sides of why people might price it higher or lower. It's hard. Also, the price of everything is going up. So,
Yeah.
like, it's like if people want to be able to support themselves doing it, like there's unfortunately sort of a push to charge more. But one thing that did end up being interesting, sort of within my space completely, is that within educational stuff specifically, often the competitors are actually priced even higher than what you would typically see for an indie game. So that's definitely true for language. Like Rosetta Stone is like not cheap at all, or at least it used to be not cheap. I don't know what it is now, but like these like professional grade tools that are not games at all, that are often kind of the thing that an indie educational game might be competing with. The market's different for that, and often the prices are higher. So people so that's something that does like help in the sense that people aren't shocked that an educational game might be priced like a little bit more highly because the space of tools it's even higher often.
Mhm. And for like games or like any software that deals only like very more like on the niche or specific side, they oftentimes get away with being slightly priced higher because there's not a lot of other examples of it out there. I mean, the
Mhm,
4X grand strategy genre that's been kind of monopolized by Paradox over the years,
mhm,
and if you're the only ones making games at like that level of depth and fidelity, you're not really facing competition anywhere else.
mhm.
Let's see. And with like I guess like looking at things in terms of I guess here's another interesting question for you about like progression in this respect.
Mhm.
When we talk about progression in a traditional game, we can of course, talk about more enemies, more challenge, more spikes everywhere. For a
Yeah.
puzzle game or linguistic style game, how do you I guess like approach things from like a beginner, intermediate, expert, master level? Like
Mhm.
how do you I guess like pace the game along those lines?
Yeah, I actually think that this is a little bit more straightforward maybe with a language game than it is for other
Hmm.
types, and specifically because I think we all have intuitions about language complexity. Like if you
Hmm.
talk to a child who doesn't know someone's vocabulary, then you're gonna naturally like leave out big words that are like on the SAT and like that kind of thing. And I think people have instincts of this. Like they sort of know of like what is the likelihood that the person you're speaking to is going to be able to understand particular vocabulary that you're using. So in many ways, designing the progression for the language game follows those same intuitions of like realizing, oh, this is a rare word in the language anyway. Like uh it doesn't need to be at the beginning of the game. This should be at the end of the game because it's not a common word and not something that people understand. Versus words that are everyday words like exit or food or that kind of thing. That should probably be earlier on in the progression because it's more universal. So I found that the challenge in pacing had that part was not hard. of figuring out where should words go in this sequence. It's more like, how do I reinforce things enough that people get it so they're ready to move on to the next thing without boring them.
And having, as you said, like using like more like universal words and phrases is a good way of like easing someone into this game. As you said, like with your example of, you're not gonna go up to like a 4-year-old and start, saying stuff like thermodynamics or throwing
Exactly.
rocket
Yes.
science terms at them. And it's a good way, as we said, like to like your pitch, as you said, of trying to introduce this as some like a super beginner level at the start. That for someone who has like no idea what they're doing, throwing in words like food or where's the bus stop, like stuff that
Mhm.
is very more common, does provide an easier way of getting them into it. Because as we said, like a nightmare when it comes to onboarding for a lot of games, not just puzzle, is throwing too much or too little at the player from the onset.
Mhm. Yeah, and um, I wonder actually, you talk to lots of developers and play lots of games, and I wonder what your opinion on this actually is. Like, what do you feel like are the biggest like challenges in puzzle game design as
Hmm.
a whole at the current stage? Is that you sort of hinted here or there that like you like, with the question about collectibles and stuff. I'm just curious like what you see sort of from the higher perspective of this.
Hmm. I think one is definitely like presentation. Like, how do
Okay.
you show this off to the player? Because I feel like we've moved away from just the, individual level style of puzzle
Mhm,
design.
mhm, 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 mhm,
And
mhm,
then the
mhm.
second thing I think is retaining players. Like, this to me has always been like the tough part about puzzle games because in every
Mhm.
single one, what will always happen is I'll get stuck on a puzzle. Maybe it will take me a minute longer, maybe it'll take me 10 minutes longer. I'll get it solved, and then I'm like, well, if that puzzle I was stuck on for so long, do I really want to go and do something else? Because again, like time is very precious, as I'm sure everyone is watching this knows. So
Yes.
being stuck for like 20, 40 minutes on a puzzle to then be told, okay, get stuck on another puzzle for 20 to 40 minutes. Like it just starts, I think, like wear thin for a lot of like progression.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is the really uh wise assessment of the challenges. Yeah. And I ran into lots of difficulties with people getting stuck. I still am.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard with this style with the style that it's always the case that for any puzzle you design there's going to be some even no matter how good you make it there's going to be some people that are just like going to have a hard time with it and how to get them not to quit is really hard.
Yeah. And I think like that could be an interesting point, like for you, as so speak. Like when we talk about traditional puzzle design or traditional puzzle games, the whole point is to play for the next puzzle, play for the next story beat.
Mhm.
If we're talking about a game that's meant to educate someone, typically, as
Mhm.
we said, like the audience that's going to play a game, like so to speak, is going to be people who are interested in learning the language or interested in expanding what they've learned. So there's probably like a greater, I guess, like reason to retain or to keep playing
Mhm.
compared to someone who's stuck on your umpteenth sliding box puzzle or Towers of
Yeah.
Hanoi. From your own
Mhm.
perspective, what has been kind of like the churn rate or I guess like the engagement rate for people who've stuck with the game?
It's I would say that I think the game could be better in terms of getting the majority of people to play longer. Like, I think it is true that the median player might quit slightly sooner than they
Mm-hmm.
would in other styles of games that are more like that are better at providing consistent dopamine. would
Mm-hmm.
would I guess that's like sort of the most like charitable way I could put this. Um, uh, however, there are some people who get really, really, really into it, and that's been really fun to see. Like, and sometimes it comes from unexpected places, from people who just really seem to enjoy this process of trying to figure out what words mean. Um, and I think that actually taps into people have a natural instinct to try to understand what things mean. Like no one likes not understanding what people are speaking about, and so like for those people who have that impulse very strongly, then sometimes they play it for a huge amount of time. Like if you look at the reviews of so to speak on Steam, there are some people who have played it for incredible amounts of time. And so I know that for some people it really is working. But for like the median person, yeah, I think it could probably be a little more exciting. So that's probably my honest answer to that.
And again, like with people wanting to learn, it keeps them more engaged with it. And I guess as like partly the challenge, or what like you've been like doing on your end, how has it been? I guess like trying to present a game, like so to speak, to people, whether they have zero knowledge or they've already started to learn.
Yeah, this has been a challenge. And I think I mean, I believe that somebody who doesn't know Japanese could pick it up and play it. Even though I talked about like I think it's a little bit difficult, but it's still doable, and that's how I've marketed it. And when I try to tell people about it, I kind of I make it clear that that's what I think. Like that's it's intended for beginners, but maybe a little challenging here and there. Um, but I have struggled with this with people see it as an edutainment game,
Hmm.
and that very quickly causes people to believe many things about the game. Some of them accurate and some of them not. Um, and it's very hard to get away from that. And it's interesting to me actually looking at Chance of Sonar that because structurally what you are doing minute to minute within the game is actually rather similar to my game, to so to speak. That game has a much higher production value, and really beautiful. Like it's just amazing. Like the way the art and the music and everything works together and has a story and like there's things that that game has so to speak doesn't. But the actual language solving mechanics are rather similar. It's the same idea that like somebody's saying something. What are they saying? I'm going to use the context to figure that out. And because my game's language is real, people see it like, oh, it's one of those educational games, and like start reading things into it that are that may or not be true. Um, whereas I admire that Chance of Sonar has managed to not have that by making the language fictional. In some ways, I think they escape some of the challenges of just people seeing it as an educational game.
Hmm. Yeah. And like to the point you were saying a few minutes ago about if you're positioning this game as like entertainment or positioning it just as a video game, people are going to come in with certain expectations as to what
Mhm.
they're going to get out of it. Someone may just be in this for as you said, like just like the educational value. Someone may be wanting some kind of progression or something to motivate them. I guess that's another question I want to ask you guys, because I think we had this conversation the last time about I guess like presenting this in a way that motivates someone to keep playing. And like this
Mhm.
again gets at the heart of puzzle design of itself. How do you get someone to click on the next puzzle? How do you get them to move
Yeah.
on to the next stage?
Yep. And the way that I did it with, so to speak, is to keep keep introducing stuff that kind of expands your skill in some obvious way. So like the game has 15 chapters, and each chapter is like covering an entirely new language skill. Like I'm gonna first you learn basic words, then eventually you're learning to say like something is there or something is not there, and then you're later on saying like, oh, something is there over in the corner, something is there to the left, and then you're talking about time, for example. Something is um at this time this thing is going to happen, so it builds in complexity in that way. So I think that when I watch people who play it for a really long time, they get into that, they like really get into this of like, oh wow, I'm figuring this out, this is cool, like, oh, I can talk about this now. I understand this whole situation. The situations that you're comprehending are becoming more and more varied, more and more interesting. um the game relies entirely on that. uh we talked about earlier, I think there's avenues for improvement there too. That
Hmm.
I think that maybe a linear structure is not necessarily the best. And I'm particularly interested in like what kinds of others adjustments to that might help people click on the next puzzle more. Particularly because when you say the next puzzle, that's implying a linear structure in some sense of like there is a next puzzle. If you have more variety in it, then people have more options for what to choose, and it's less clear that it's sort of the game is less forcing you down a particular path, which can be good and bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I guess like with the notion of like linearity versus open ended, that's another like very interesting, I think, balancing challenge for a puzzle game. Like when you look at something like Isles of Sea and Skyrim, going back to something like Baba Is You. Like once you
Mhm.
get past like the opening section of Baba Is You, you can go into like different worlds with their own challenges. And on one side, it gives a player freedom that if I'm stuck in this region, I can go over here. But then, of course, you run into that challenge of, okay, I go over here first, and this is the super hard, 10 times more challenging than what we just did. I get completely knocked out. I just feel like, why do I want to keep playing it? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for a lot of the games I play, I typically just go there, like, on purpose. I always do the hardest stuff first, just get that out of the way.
Yeah, no, and it's so interesting. Like even some games that I think are more open world puzzle games that are well designed. The Witness is the game that comes to mind. I don't know if you've.
Hmm.
I had a conversation with a friend recently, and that friend had like gone into the hard part first, and his
Hmm.
experience with the game is just completely different from mine because I happen to choose like a different order of what to focus on, and so it is hard. Yeah, like I was kind of conservative with the design, so to speak, and just made it linear, and that way I know what people are doing. But um, uh, I agree that you can get yourself into trouble by giving people choice.
Yeah, and glad you mentioned the witness because that's another one. That was like another point that, and like this kind of gets at what we were talking about earlier in terms of how someone goes in with zero experience. Like with
Hmm.
the witness, I ran to that issue where I kind of like fumbled through like the first few puzzles. Then when kind of the training wheels come off, I'm like, why what the heck is even the solution? Like I don't even know, like it's not a case of me not understanding the solution. I didn't even understand the process to get to the solution.
Yeah.
And you have that on top of the fact that it is nonlinear. So let's say the person went right and they ended up in advanced town when maybe they should have walked this way to where the
Yeah.
puzzle a little bit easier. And as a developer, you can't, it's one of these that you can't really have it both ways. You can't say go everywhere you want, but go here first. Go right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. It's very difficult, and you cannot stop people from going right.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people will, and how and the communication of how to make people realize that this is not where they were intended to go, even though they have the freedom to do it, is hard. Yeah, I think this is an unsolved problem.
Mm-hmm. I was just trying to think of another example of like a more like open-ended puzzle game. There's one that I played. I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately. I think this was like, oh, it had very much like similar vibes of The Witness, and I
Mhm.
ran to that problem. But I also ran to the fact that they introduced new mechanics. So it was kind of like, okay, I did the beginner level puzzle, and then I sort of like wandered my way around. I found the super expert puzzle that introduced like 5 additional mechanics I've never seen before at their highest level. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I, I have no idea. And again, it's that frustration with a lot of these kinds of games where like if someone is getting frustrated, like it's a very different thing when we talk about being frustrated in like an action game or a reflex driven title
Mhm.
where if it's a platforming challenge, it will come down to just learning execution or learning the
Mhm.
timing. And if someone can pick that up, great. If they don't, they know that the game is not for them. If we're talking
Mhm.
from a puzzle perspective, one bad puzzle at the wrong spot can just
Yeah.
ruin the entire
Yeah.
experience. There was that game, I always forget the name of it, the one that was designed by to look like H.R. Geiger, like very like alien looking world. This
Oh,
came out
Scorn.
Scorn, yes, and it
Yeah.
came out like 2 3 years ago, and I remember that opening puzzle was horrible. Like it just was a
Oh,
very slow, very like
oh,
uh, uh, padded out experience. And once you do that puzzle, you never do anything else like it for the rest of the game.
uh,
But so many people, they were so turned off by that puzzle that they just stopped playing the game.
yeah,
And there's like no easy way to get around it other than just either redesign that entire puzzle or just cutting it out.
yeah. I understand. Yeah, it's hard.
So I guess to begin to wrap things up, one thing that I want to ask you about, we've talked a lot about kind of ending a game, like so to
Hmm.
speak. So
Hmm.
I want to kind of like build on that in terms of, I guess, the quote unquote final challenge. Because this is something that greatly varies depending upon the game that we've been talking about. If I'm
Yeah,
playing a game like Hollow Knight, I played the White Palace, I did the Path of Pain, I
yeah,
love them
yeah.
both. If we're talking about like a puzzle game, or especially like something like a
Hmm.
Zachtronics, it
Hmm.
becomes this just like learn, use every single mechanic
Yeah,
we've taught you in order to do this. But with a
yeah.
linguistic style game, what
Hmm.
was kind of like your approach or thought process to what did you want the final challenge to be?
This is a great question. And actually, what I did is I made the final part of the game feel like the ending through thematic
Mm-hmm.
elements and not through difficulty elements.
Mm.
So there's not much of a story, but there's a little bit of a narrative arc that the beginning of, so to speak, involves landing a plane and arriving somewhere. And then, I mean, I don't think I'm spoiling much, that the end of it involves going back to the airport and some of the emotions involved with leaving a place after
Mm.
you've gone there on a trip and the plane takes off. And so the language that you are comprehending in that final part of it is actually not significantly more difficult than the rest of the game. It communicates that it's ending through other means.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's like another very like interesting aspect when we talk about kind of the end of certain titles like this. That depending upon like how the progression or how the mechanics are introduced, there are games where the ending can oftentimes be easier than everything else that came before it. If you've
Mhm.
mastered everything in a Souls-like or a very like challenging action game, once you know how all that works, it's not like the game can throw something as a curveball at you. If you've mastered this entire system, the final challenge in that respect just feels more like almost like a graduation present at the end that you've learned everything.
Yeah.
You can do it all. And then there again, there are some games that will have that final challenge as being this gauntlet of let's just
Mhm.
throw let's throw something brand new at the player. I like the last 2 minutes of the game and
Yeah.
try and force them to learn it.
Yeah, it's hard. And I had dreams of having the game build up to some crazy difficult challenge. I would so the final part of it would be like, like FDL. Have you played FDL? I love the ending of this. It
Mm.
just like you get into this impossible situation and then you get yourself out of it, and I love that. And I think that's sort of an avenue for future exploration of like how to do that within a language game. I did not do that, and I don't think Chess of Sinar did that either.
Mm-hmm.
It's both games are kind of using thematic elements.
Yep. And again, that also works with like the audience that you're trying to approach.
Mhm.
Like, if you're building this to like help someone like learn, it doesn't really make sense to like as you're saying earlier, like just like all of a sudden go from like elementary or high school challenge of here's college level, like at like the final minute of this game, try and figure it
Right.
out.
Mhm.
So I guess as another question to like kind of like take us to the end for our conversation. What and like the game has been out since March for people listening
Mhm.
to us either live or recorded. What has been like? Have you thought at all about like more content, or are you kind of ready to like move on to whatever your next project may be?
I'm exploring both. Like I'm open to the idea of expanding the game, and I might do that. But I'm also looking into figuring out what like sort of new projects I would want to do too. I'm trying some things and trying to see what I get excited about.
And that was, I think, is a very interesting point. Like, for a lot of developers, and when we spoke about, like, how, I guess, like, they structured their game dev, and this was, like, 10, 12 years ago, a lot of them will kind of, like, keep to, like, one single game, like, or one single genre. If I made a platform, I'm going to make another platform, or
Mhm.
another one. And we've
Yeah.
seen, like, a lot more, like, newer developers are, I think, far more willing to, like, experiment or branch out.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, I made a platformer. Maybe this time I'll work on a shooter. Maybe this time I'll work on a puzzle game. It just, I think, from what we see, I think it just seems like more like a healthier process to kind of look at different ways of approaching design.
Yeah, and I'm open to trying new things, but I also have built this like expertise around
Yeah.
particular design. So balancing the, yeah, it's hard. I don't have an exact answer of what the best thing to do is, but I'm trying things.
hmm So I guess here's a question for you then. If
Mhm.
you were to make a like a sequel or another game, like so to speak, in a different language, are there any languages like you're interested in like trying to explore?
That's an interesting question. I would have so the answer to this question is I have studied Chinese, Mandarin, and I've studied Russian, and those are the languages that I feel like I could actually like try to make something.
hmm
It really requires a lot of skill at the language to try to make a game about it. But I don't know necessarily whether or not those are the games where there's the biggest. Those are the languages where there's the biggest market. Probably, maybe it's hard to tell. But when I see lists of what languages people are learning on things like Duolingo, it's usually like Spanish and French and stuff. And unfortunately, I don't know those as well. So Japanese is kind of this like happy medium where I had experience in it, and then a lot of people are trying to learn it.
And I guess like that's a another interesting question that I forgot to ask. In terms of the story of like the game, like so to speak, I guess like how did you think about like having like the story as a part of like the learning process, or as a way of again like bringing the player in? Because as we said, there's a lot of puzzle games where there is no story. Here's
Yeah.
20 rows of puzzles. Why you do them? Who knows? Just solve them.
Yeah, to be honest, the game doesn't really have much of a story. There's just
hmm
like some thematic framing that shows up here and there, like some things that are in some cutscenes that are at the beginning and the end that kind of communicate that there's like a bigger thing going on. But no, the game could have a lot more story. There's some little stories that come out from the language puzzles though. Like some of the signs in the game are real signs that I thought were funny. And so there's actually a little story about like where is that sign? Why is that there? That you kind of come to understand from playing the game.
All right. I think I am just about out of questions. So, I guess before we kind of say goodbye, anything else you want to bring up regarding the design of, so to speak?
I think this is a good place to stop. This has been a great conversation, and I feel like I've said all these things I wanted to talk about. So, um, thanks so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So, I think with that, we will say good night. So, I guess in terms of social media, anything you want to mention for people to find you, Twitter, X, Blue, whatever.
Yeah, I'm on all of them. I have a Blue Sky account and a Twitter account, and I'm on Mastodon too. And I feel like it's not too hard to find my handles for that.
All right. And I guess as a final question for you, like for any developers watching this who are thinking about making like a linguistic style game or even just like an edutainment style game, any final thoughts or words of advice in terms of like how you package that, how you approach it, anything like that?
Yeah, with educational games specifically, I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that they try to make something that's like the textbook and not whatever the real world scenario was that got people excited about teaching that topic in the first place. So, anything you learn in school, there's a reason it's there, even though it may have gotten pretty far away from that. But making a gamified textbook isn't fun. But learning is fun. Like people learn all the
hmm
time, including any game, I would argue. Even games that are not strictly educational, people are learning skills and that those skills that they are learning are highly correlated with what makes it fun. Um, so so to speak, I try to make it like actually being in Japan, not like a Japanese textbook, I guess. Right. And
Mhm.
I think that served me well. And that's sort of the one thing I've learned from all of this is like try to like go back to whatever the scenario was that made people excited about this educational topic in the beginning and try to simulate that.
All right. Yep. And again, it's like like presenting this stuff is such the challenge as we've spoken about for just over an hour.
Yeah.
So I guess like final point then, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans or the people who've enjoyed, so to speak, to take us out?
Oh, thank you so much for like enjoying the game. Like it's been so amazingly rewarding uh releasing it and then getting all of the feedback that I've gotten and realizing that there's people who have spent so much time playing this. It's really been a great experience and very fulfilling.
All right. Well, Erik, again, thank you so much for coming on. And again, congratulations on the release. And I'll look
Thank
forward to
you.
seeing what you have next.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you.
Not at all, or not a problem. So, with that, we're going to end things here for our conversation. So, for anyone watching this live or recorded, thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff, check out Discord, Patreon, all the copies of my books. I do not teach you at all about language in any of my books, so do not come to them for that. If you're interested in, so to speak, there'll be links to that down below, so be sure to check that out. And as I always say, if you're a developer working on a game or just want to come on and talk about game dev, we're always looking for guests for this series, so be sure to reach out. So again, Erik, thank you for coming on, and have a great weekend. Hopefully we'll talk again in the future.
Thank you. Have a great weekend too.
And same for everyone watching. So be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great night.